Keanu Reeves thought he was walking into a courtroom to pay a fine, until the judge publicly mocks his kindness and hands down a sentence no one expected. Forced to serve at a crumbling homeless shelter, Keanu faces a choice that could cost him everything and uncover a secret that will leave you speechless. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Keanu Reeves was no ordinary movie star. For all his fame, fortune, and blockbuster films, there was something different about him. He lived a life far quieter than his peers. No sprawling mansions in Beverly Hills, no fleets of luxury cars, no endless parade of red carpets. Instead, Keanu lived in a modest house, often spotted riding the subway or sitting quietly in a park with a paperback book in hand. To those who knew him, or thought they did, he was kindness personified. A man who had quietly given away millions to children's hospitals. A man who secretly paid for a cancer patient's treatment without asking for thanks. A man who took pay cuts so that stunt teams and crew members could be paid fairly. But what few people understood was how deeply Keanu's life had been shaped by loss. His father had walked out when Keanu was just 3 years old. Later in life, his beloved daughter Ava was stillborn. Just 2 years after that, his longtime partner Jennifer Syme died tragically in a car accident. He carried these wounds quietly, his grief tucked away behind a soft smile and thoughtful gaze. Yet, it was precisely these tragedies that had shaped the man he became. Humble, generous, always aware that life could change in an instant. So when Keanu spoke, people listened. And when he posted something on social media, it didn't just trend, it sparked movements. Which is why his offhand comment one rainy Thursday afternoon changed everything. It had seemed harmless at the time. Keanu had shared an article about an ambitious new redevelopment project in Eastside, an old neighborhood he hadn't visited in decades. He'd captioned it simply, "Excited to see new life coming to this community. Let's build a better future together." Within minutes, the post had gone viral. Thousands of likes, shares, and comments poured in. Investors pounced. Stocks in the development company soared. The project gained momentum faster than anyone expected. But Keanu hadn't realized what was really happening behind the scenes. The redevelopment wasn't building homes for families, it was tearing them down. Whole blocks of affordable housing were being demolished. Dozens of low-income families were displaced, their rent-controlled apartments replaced by luxury condos and boutique shops. Parents scrambled to find shelter. Children were pulled from their schools. Communities that had stood together for generations were suddenly scattered and broken. And it all traced back to Keanu's single sentence of public support. The backlash was swift. Protests erupted outside the developers' offices. Social media turned against him, calling him out of touch and careless. His name trended for all the wrong reasons. Keanu the gentrifier, Hollywood hypocrite. Keanu was devastated. He hadn't meant to hurt anyone. He thought he was supporting something good. But intentions didn't erase consequences. The Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, launched an investigation. It wasn't long before they determined that Keanu's comment, while unintentional, had triggered a speculative surge in the developer's stock. Investors had made millions. But small shareholders, people who bought in late following Keanu's post, lost everything when the stock crashed days later. Keanu agreed to a settlement immediately. He paid fines without protest, donated money to affordable housing initiatives, publicly apologized, but the damage was done. His reputation was bruised, his spirit was shaken, and the families who had lost their homes still had nowhere to go. For many, that would have been the end of it. A fine paid, a statement released, and life goes on. But not for Judge Loretta Palmer. She was known for her no-nonsense approach to justice, sharp-eyed, steel-spined, and fiercely protective of ordinary people. When Keanu's case came across her desk, She saw something deeper than a celebrity misstep. She saw a man who had built his life on compassion, but who had also lost sight of the everyday struggles most people faced. So, at Keanu's contempt hearing, she made a decision that stunned the courtroom. "The fines don't teach you anything, Mr. Reeves," she said calmly, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You pay $1 million like I pay for coffee, but that doesn't make the consequences go away." Keanu sat there quietly, nodding, accepting whatever punishment she deemed fit. "Starting tomorrow," Judge Palmer continued, "you will complete 1,000 hours of community service at Haven House. It's a homeless shelter for displaced families, many of whom lost their homes because of the redevelopment project you supported." There was a gasp in the room. Even Keanu's attorney looked stunned. "No assistance, no donations, no cameras," she said, holding his gaze. "Just you. One pair of hands. 1,000 hours. Keanu's throat tightened. He'd faced grief, loneliness, and heartbreak in his life, but this was something entirely different. A chance, not to pay back money, but to stand face to face with the people his mistake had harmed. He nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor." And that's how it began. A journey that would test everything Keanu Reeves believed about himself. And what came next, no one could have predicted. The courtroom was colder than Keanu expected. Not the kind of cold that seeped into the skin, but something more clinical, impersonal. He sat quietly at the defense table, hands resting in his lap, watching the quiet shuffle of papers and the polite murmur of lawyers preparing their arguments. His attorney, James Keller, leaned in. "Just answer what she asks. Don't volunteer anything. Don't apologize too much. It can backfire," Keller whispered. Keanu gave a small nod. It was strange. After all these years in the spotlight, on red carpets and movie sets, it was here, in this ordinary room with faded oak walls and buzzing fluorescent lights, where he felt most exposed. Vulnerable, not because of who he was, but because of what he might have failed to be. "All rise," the bailiff called, his voice sharp against the heavy stillness. Everyone stood as Judge Loretta Palmer entered. She was small in stature, wearing plain black robes, but the room changed as she walked in. There was something about her presence, steady, no nonsense, uncompromising. Her gray hair was pulled into a severe twist at the back of her head, and her dark eyes flicked over Keanu as if measuring the weight of his soul. "You may be seated," she said, and papers rustled as everyone settled. "Mr. Reeves," Judge Palmer began, her voice even but cold, "you've found yourself here today because of a chain of events that, while not criminal in intent, were devastating in impact." Keanu swallowed and leaned toward the microphone. "Yes, Your Honor." She raised an eyebrow. "You agree then that your words, careless as they were, helped accelerate a redevelopment project that displaced dozens of families?" He didn't flinch. "I do. You agree that your post caused an artificial spike in stock prices, leading to small investors losing their savings when the bubble burst?" "Yes, Your Honor." His voice remained calm, but a ripple of shame passed through his chest. "You are not the first celebrity to mistake influence for wisdom," she said, "but I find it fascinating that a man so beloved for his humility, his charity, and his kindness could be so blind." The words hit harder than any headline he'd read in the last few weeks. Keanu took a slow breath, but said nothing. Judge Palmer studied him for a long moment. "You have paid your fines. The Securities and Exchange Commission has no further interest in you, and yet—" She trailed off, glancing at the rows of reporters scribbling notes behind him. "And yet I believe money has never really been your problem, has it, Mr. Reeves?" Keanu's brow furrowed, unsure if it was a question he was meant to answer. Judge Palmer didn't wait for one. "You live modestly. You take the bus. You donate millions in secret. People admire that. But I'm not convinced you understand what people truly admire about you." The courtroom remained silent, except for the faint tick of the old wall clock. Keanu met her gaze. I I try to do the right thing." "You try," she echoed, "and I believe you try. But you do it from a distance. You sign checks. You make appearances. You inspire people with roles where you play a hero. But the world doesn't need another hero, Mr. Reeves." Her words hung heavy in the air. Keanu's stomach churned, but he stayed composed. Judge Palmer set down her papers and removed her glasses. "What the world needs is someone who doesn't stand above others and offer help, but someone who stands with them, shoulder to shoulder, and works for change. That's what's missing in your equation." Keanu felt James shift beside him, preparing to stand. But Judge Palmer wasn't finished. "I'm not here to punish you with money, Mr. Reeves. You've paid your fines, and I'm sure it made no dent in your lifestyle. No, this is about something far more valuable than wealth." She opened a folder and removed a single page. "Starting tomorrow, you are to complete 1,000 hours of community service at Haven House." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Keanu blinked, unsure he heard her correctly. "Haven House," she repeated, "a transitional shelter for families displaced by the East Side redevelopment project. The very project you helped endorse." Keanu's throat tightened. "Yes, Your Honor. You will not serve in an honorary role. You will not make donations to substitute for your time. You will work under the supervision of Ms. Darla Washington, the shelter director. You will mop floors, you will prepare meals, you will fix broken things. Whatever she needs, you will do. Is that clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," Keanu said softly. James finally stood. "Your Honor, my client is fully prepared to contribute additional funds." "Mr. Keller," Judge Palmer cut in sharply, "sit down." James hesitated, then obeyed. Judge Palmer fixed her gaze on Keanu once more. "You have 6 months to complete your service. If you are late, if you skip days, if you treat this like another photo op for goodwill, I will find you in contempt and extend your service indefinitely." Keanu nodded slowly. "Understood." The gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Court is adjourned." The courtroom erupted in whispers as Judge Palmer rose and left. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Cameras clicked. James packed his papers quickly. "This is going to be a PR disaster," he muttered. "You'll be mopping floors alongside cameras and live streams before you know it." But Keanu wasn't listening. He was staring at the page Judge Palmer had left on the table. Haven House. The name tugged at something distant in his mind. He remembered hearing about it years ago when it first opened, a place for families trying to rebuild their lives. Now it was on the verge of closing, caught in the crossfire of the very redevelopment project he'd unwittingly endorsed. As he stood, flashes exploded from the hallway as reporters pressed forward. "Keanu, what do you say about the judge's sentence? Do you think mopping floors will change anything?" Hollywood's humbled hero, how does it feel to be taken down a peg? He didn't answer. He simply walked forward, his head bowed slightly, his heart heavier than it had been in years. The next morning's headlines were brutal. From star to servant. Judge Palmer teaches St. Keanu a lesson. Hollywood's nicest guy gets his hands dirty. But Keanu didn't care about the headlines. For the first time in his life, he wasn't worried about his reputation. He was thinking about Haven House and wondering who he might become on the other side of this sentence. The sun had barely risen over Los Angeles when Keanu Reeves pulled his motorcycle into the cracked parking lot of Haven House. It was quieter than he expected for a place called home by so many. A faded sign hung loosely above the entrance, one hinge missing. Keanu sat there for a long moment, his gloved hands resting on the handlebars, staring at the building. He had faced camera crews, studio execs, and high-octane stunt scenes. But this? He felt out of his depth. He killed the engine and dismounted. As he pulled off his helmet, he caught sight of a small pair of eyes peeking through the blinds of the second-floor window. A flash of curiosity, maybe even hope. He took a deep breath and walked toward the entrance. Inside, the air smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet. The lobby was small, functional. A few plastic chairs lined the walls, and the bulletin board overflowed with job postings and handwritten notes offering babysitting or carpool rides. A woman emerged from an office behind the desk. She was maybe late 50s, with gray streaks through tightly coiled hair pulled back into a bun. Her dark brown eyes measured him in a glance, then narrowed slightly. She wiped her hands on a faded apron before approaching. "You're him," she said. "Keanu Reeves." He nodded. "And you must be Ms. Darla Washington." "Director Washington," she corrected, but without malice. "Most folks call me Darla." He offered a hand, but instead of shaking it, she handed him a clipboard. "Sign in." Keanu blinked, then took the pen. He signed. Full name, date, time, and... "You're early," Darla observed, glancing at the clock. "That's a start. I figured I shouldn't be late," Keanu replied quietly. Darla gave a brief nod of approval. "Judge Palmer said you'd show up. I wasn't sure whether you'd bring a camera crew." "I left them at home," Keanu said with a faint smile. It didn't move her. Darla gestured toward the hallway. "Follow me." As they walked, Keanu saw children's drawings taped to the walls, smiling stick figures, crayon houses, and a lot of stars. Some were colored in carefully. Others looked rushed, frantic, as if drawn by someone desperate to put happiness on paper. Darla stopped in front of a door. A small plaque read, "Janitor's Closet." "We've got 2 working bathrooms," she said, unlocking the door and handing him a mop and a bucket. "Both need a deep clean. We're short on volunteers this week." Keanu stared at the mop like it was an unfamiliar prop from a movie he hadn't agreed to. "I thought I might start with fundraising, maybe set up something long-term." Darla's expression didn't change. "We need hands, not handouts. Fundraising comes later." She turned to leave, then paused. "Cleaning supplies are in the cabinet. Wear gloves. Some things in there shouldn't be touched with bare hands." And just like that, she walked away. Keanu sighed, rolled up the sleeves of his black Henley shirt, and got to work. 2 hours later, he emerged from the men's bathroom with a trash bag in one hand and the mop in the other. Sweat darkened the fabric along his back. His knees ached. His hands smelled faintly of industrial bleach despite 2 pairs of gloves. "Not bad," Darla said as he returned the supplies. She inspected the mop. "You didn't quit after 10 minutes. I expected you to." Keanu set the trash bag down by the back door. "I made a promise," he said, simply. "Plenty of people make promises," Darla replied. "They don't always keep them." Before Keanu could answer, he heard a light giggle from down the hall. He turned to see a little girl in a bright yellow hoodie with faded butterflies on the front. She peeked out from behind a doorframe, watching him with wide, curious eyes. "That's Lily," Darla said softly. "She's 8. Smart as a whip. Heart condition." "Serious?" Keanu asked. "Very," Darla said. "Her mom, Maya, works 2 part-time jobs and volunteers here when she can. They've been at Haven House for 3 months. She's doing everything right, just needs a break." Lily stepped closer, still staring at Keanu like he was something from another world. Finally, she spoke. "Are you really the Matrix guy?" Keanu smiled and crouched down to her level. "I am." She tilted her head. "Can you really dodge bullets?" He chuckled softly. "Only in the movies." Lily grinned. "I knew it was fake, but it was still cool." Keanu held out his hand. "Keanu." She shook it solemnly. "Lily." The days blurred together after that. Every morning, Keanu showed up before dawn. He mopped floors, fixed leaky pipes, cleaned out storage rooms filled with broken toys and forgotten clothes. He moved beds, built shelves, installed a new faucet when the kitchens broke. Each day, Darla gave him more to do, and each day, Lily found him. She'd ask him about the movies, about stunts, about the motorcycles he rode, and then, inevitably, about why he was there. "Did you do something bad?" she asked one afternoon, while watching him paint a cracked window frame. "I made a mistake," Keanu said carefully. "I didn't mean to, but people got hurt." She considered that. Like when you accidentally step on someone's foot and they cry? Sort of, he said. But bigger. Lily nodded. You're fixing it, though. I'm trying. You'll do it, she said with certainty. You're Neo. One evening, Keanu stayed late helping Maya sort donations in the basement. The single overhead light flickered as they worked in silence, folding clothes into neat piles. Thank you for helping, Maya said finally, without looking up. You're welcome, Keanu replied. I'm glad to be here. You don't have to be, she said. Most people just write checks. I've done that, he admitted. It wasn't enough. Maya folded a child's jacket slowly. It's not just the money, you know. It's the people who stay, who don't disappear when things get messy. Keanu glanced at her. Her face was tired but strong. I'm not going anywhere, he said softly. Maya smiled faintly. We'll see. A week later, Darla called him into her office. The air was heavier there, as if the weight of the whole building settled behind her desk. We have a problem, she said, sliding a manila envelope toward him. Inside were papers, legal notices, eviction orders, permits. Keanu flipped through them slowly, his stomach tightening with each page. This is a demolition schedule, he said finally. Darla nodded. Developer named Richard Hayes bought the property 2 months ago. He's planning luxury condos. The shelter's got 30 days. Keanu sat back in his chair. Isn't there anything we can do? We've appealed, Darla said, but unless we come up with a miracle, we're out. Hayes, Keanu murmured. The name rang a bell. A ruthless businessman, known for squeezing every drop of profit from distressed properties. Cold, calculating, no interest in community welfare. He remembered reading an article years ago where Hayes had said, feelings don't balance budgets. I can talk to him, Keanu said. Darla snorted. So can I. He doesn't care. Unless you've got $1 billion lying around, he's not listening. Keanu rubbed his hands together, his mind racing. 30 days? After all this, they were going to lose everything anyway? He stood abruptly. I'll figure something out. Darla watched him go. Hope you're better at fixing broken systems than leaky pipes. That night, Keanu sat on the shelter's roof, staring out over the city skyline. The lights glowed in the distance, a faraway world of power and influence. He could go back to it, go back to his life. He'd done his time, fulfilled the judge's sentence. But he thought of Lily's wide smile, Maya's tired eyes, Darla's fierce strength, and the people who called Haven House their home. He wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. Keanu Reeves wasn't a stranger to impossible odds. In films, he had faced villains with nothing but his fists and an iron will. But standing on the roof of Haven House, looking at a stack of eviction notices, he realized this wasn't a movie. No stunt doubles, no second takes. Just people who needed help, and a man who wasn't sure how to give it. But he knew where to start. Within hours of reading the demolition order, Keanu's longtime assistant Mark was on a secured call in his home office. Mark was efficient, discreet, and he never asked why. You're serious? Mark said after Keanu finished explaining. As serious as I've ever been, Keanu said. I want to know everything about Richard Hayes. Everything. Mark was silent for a moment. Then, give me a day. Keanu returned to Haven House the next morning with heavy steps. He spent hours fixing a broken water heater in the basement, his hands stained with rust and old pipe grime. He scrubbed floors, hauled boxes of canned goods, and repaired a fence around the garden. His body ached, but his mind was sharper than ever. In the afternoon, he found Lily sitting on the front steps with a small sketchbook in her lap. She was drawing quietly, a pencil clenched tight in her thin fingers. What are you working on? Keanu asked as he knelt beside her. It's a house, she said without looking up. For Mom and me. I'm designing it. Keanu smiled softly. Can I see? She hesitated for a moment, then flipped the book around. The drawing was rough but thoughtful. Wide windows, a garden, on the roof, solar panels. It's green energy, Lily explained, pointing to the roof. So we don't have to pay bills we can't afford. You're an architect, Keanu said. Maybe, she shrugged. Or a scientist. Her pencil slowed. But if we lose Haven House, I don't know where we'll go. Keanu said nothing for a long moment. I'm working on something, he promised. A plan. Lily nodded, unconvinced, but she closed the sketchbook gently and smiled up at him anyway. You're Neo, she said. You can do anything. By evening, Mark's message came through. I've got something. Keanu drove to his private office, where Mark was already waiting with a thick file. Tyes isn't just a developer, Mark began. He's got a history here. Mark laid out old photos and documents. One black and white picture showed a boy no older than 10 standing in front of Haven House. A woman stood beside him, holding his hand tightly. Her smile was brittle. That's Hayes, Keanu asked. Yeah. His mother was Mary Ann Hayes. They lived at Haven House for 6 months in 2002. After that, they moved into a cheap apartment across town. 6 months later, they were evicted. Keanu read the next document. Mary Ann Hayes. Cause of death, hypothermia. Date, February 2003. She died on the street, Mark said quietly. She tried to come back to Haven House, but they didn't have room. Overcapacity. Keanu closed the file slowly. So Hayes is tearing the place down to erase the past? Or punish it, Mark said. Or maybe build something better. Keanu stared at the photo of the boy. He knew that look. The emptiness of losing someone, the guilt of not being able to save them. He stood. We need someone who can see what we're not seeing. Later that week, Keanu met Sophia Chen. Sophia was a community leader, known for turning struggling neighborhoods into thriving ones, without pushing people out. She was sharp-eyed, quick-witted, and wore sensible shoes. She shook Keanu's hand firmly but with warmth. You're taller in person, she observed. And less brooding. You're exactly as smart as they say, Keanu replied. Sophia smiled faintly. Why do you need me? Because I can't build a shelter out of movie scripts, he said, and Haven House doesn't have much time. He explained everything, the demolition, Hayes's plans, Lily's heart condition, Maya's fight for stability. Sophia listened without interrupting. Finally, she leaned back in her chair and said, I have some ideas. Sophia met with Darla the next morning. The two women hit it off immediately, both no-nonsense and focused on what mattered. People. For hours, they brainstormed with Keanu. A phased redevelopment plan took shape, one that could save Haven House and offer more comprehensive services than ever before. We build in stages, Sophia explained. Start with the medical center. Haven House families stay until the new units are ready. We offer job training, childcare, mental health services. Darla nodded slowly. That's good. But who pays for it? I will, Keanu said simply. And I'll find others who will too. They stared at him. You're serious? Darla asked. He smiled faintly. I've made crazier decisions. As plans came together, Keanu put his money where his mouth was, literally. He funded emergency repairs to the roof, fixed the heating system, and even paid for new beds. But he did it quietly. No press releases, no cameras, just invoices marked paid. And he worked. Every day under Darla's guidance, Keanu was there. He painted walls, repaired broken furniture, cooked meals alongside the kitchen staff. Some volunteers still whispered behind his back, but most just handed him a broom and got to work beside him. And little by little, Maya's skepticism thawed. One evening, Keanu found her sanding down old chairs for the dining hall. He picked up a sander and worked beside her in silence. You're not just playing the hero, are you? Maya asked after a while. No, Keanu said. I'm just trying to help. She glanced at him. Why? Because someone needs to. Maya nodded, and after a long silence, she said quietly, Thank you. The media attention came whether Keanu wanted it or not. At first, the tabloids called it Hollywood's humble hero returns to his roots. then Keanu's secret shelter mission, then the actor who wouldn't quit. But Keanu refused interviews. When paparazzi showed up, Darla chased them off with a broom and a fierce glare. Keanu just kept showing up, day after day, and the work spoke for itself. 2 weeks into the project, Sophia and Keanu stood outside Haven House, staring at the faded brick and broken windows. "You really think Hayes will go for this?" Keanu asked. Sophia shrugged. "He's got his reasons. But we appeal to the part of him that lost something here. Not the businessman, the boy." Keanu sighed. "That's a long shot." Sophia smiled faintly. "You're Keanu Reeves. You believe in long shots." That night, Keanu sat in Haven House's garden, watching the kids play under the fairy lights Maya had strung up. Lily was teaching another little girl how to build a paper airplane. "You're quiet," Darla said, sitting beside him. "Just thinking." "About what?" Keanu exhaled. "About how I've spent my life building things on screen, pretend lives, pretend worlds. And now I'm here, trying to fix something real." Darla smiled softly. "You're doing more than most." He shook his head. "It's not enough. It's a start," she said, "and sometimes that's all you need." The next morning, Keanu received a call from Mark. Hayes agreed to a meeting. "When?" Keanu asked. "Tomorrow, his office." Keanu hung up and looked around Haven House. The children, the parents. The hope that hung by a thread. Tomorrow, he thought, it could change everything. He closed his eyes and said quietly, "Don't let me fail them." The night was thick with anticipation. Haven House's common room, normally a place for quiet dinners or kids' art projects, buzzed with tension. Folding chairs scraped against the scuffed hardwood floor as dozens of residents, city officials, and journalists filled the space. Even the older volunteers who usually preferred to stay out of the spotlight had shown up. They all knew something was about to happen. Keanu Reeves stood by the window, gazing out at the streetlights flickering beyond the cracked glass. His hands were shoved deep in his jacket pockets, his expression unreadable. Only Maya and Darla had seen him like this before. Focused, silent, and carrying the weight of a decision too heavy for one man. Sophia Chen leaned in. "You ready?" Keanu exhaled slowly. "As I'll ever be." At precisely 7 p.m., Darla called the meeting to order. Her voice, usually warm and maternal, had a steel edge tonight. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Tonight, we talk about the future of Haven House." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. At the back of the room, Judge Loretta Palmer slipped in, unnoticed by most. She took a seat quietly, pen in hand, her sharp gaze following every word, every reaction. Then the door opened again, and Richard Hayes entered. He was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, no tie. His eyes scanned the room with practiced indifference, but Keanu saw something different tonight. Not arrogance, not disdain, something deeper, something raw. Hayes nodded curtly at Darla, then took a seat by himself near the center aisle. Sophia glanced at Keanu. He gave her a small nod. It was time. Keanu stepped to the front of the room. The chatter died down instantly. He looked over the crowd. He saw faces he'd come to know over the past weeks. Maya, arms protectively around Lily, who was bundled in a blanket. Mr. Alvarez, the retired mechanic who fixed everyone's cars in the parking lot. Tanya, the nursing student who checked blood pressure and handed out vitamins every morning. They were waiting, hoping. Keanu took a breath. "I'm Keanu Reeves," he began, his voice steady but quiet. "You all know that. Some of you might still be wondering why I'm here. I've asked myself the same thing." A few nervous laughs broke the tension. "I've spent the last few weeks working here, cleaning floors, fixing leaks, serving meals, but I've also been listening, learning, and I've realized something." His gaze swept the room. "This place isn't just a shelter, it's a lifeline." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "But Haven House is at risk," Keanu continued. "Richard Hayes," he gestured toward Hayes without accusation, owns the rights to redevelop this property, and until now, the plan was simple: tear it down, build something new. The murmurs returned, louder this time: fear, anger, resentment. Keanu raised a hand for silence. But we have another option. He turned to face Hayes fully. Mr. Hayes, I'm proposing something different, something better. Hayes arched an eyebrow but said nothing. Keanu pressed on. We build a new medical center first, on the adjacent lot. We do it immediately. We bring in services this community desperately needs: doctors, nurses, mental health support, job training. And while we do that, we phase construction on the rest of the site. He walked to a large easel where Sophia had prepared drawings of the phased plan. No one gets displaced. Families stay while new housing is built. When it's ready, they move in, and the old building, Haven House as we know it, becomes a permanent community center. Sophia stepped forward. We've already started work on securing funding, she said. Keanu's committed to covering initial costs. We have architects on standby. We can make this happen. A long silence stretched across the room. Then Hayes stood. And why, he said slowly, his voice cutting through the quiet like a blade, should I believe this isn't a PR stunt? A ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. Keanu didn't flinch. Because I'm not here for my image, Keanu replied calmly. I'm here because I met Lily. He gestured toward the young girl sitting beside Maya. Lily gave a shy wave. Lily's 8 years old. She's brilliant. She wants to be a scientist, but she has a serious heart condition. She needs a stable home and medical care if she's going to survive, let alone thrive. Keanu's voice softened. I've spent my life pretending to be heroes on film, but none of that matters if I can't do something real when it counts. He met Hayes' eyes directly. This is one of those moments. Hayes was silent. His gaze flicked to Lily, then back to Keanu. Something in his expression cracked. Just for a second. You don't understand, Hayes said quietly. You don't know what it's like to lose someone because the system failed them. Keanu nodded slowly. I do. I lost my daughter, then my partner. I know grief, Mr. Hayes, and I know what it's like to feel powerless. A murmur went through the crowd. Few knew the full depth of Keanu's losses. Even fewer expected him to say it out loud. Hayes inhaled sharply. I swore I'd fix the system that failed my mother, he said, his voice rough. That I'd build something better, not patchwork solutions, not band-aids. And you can, Keanu said, but not by tearing people down, by lifting them up. With us, not instead of us. Another long silence followed. Then Judge Palmer stood. Her voice, though quiet, carried. Mr. Hayes, she said. Mr. Reeves may be an actor, but I've watched him over these past months. His commitment isn't for show. She looked around the room. This isn't about punishment anymore. This is about building something worthy. Hayes glanced at her, then at Darla. And you'd trust me to be part of that? Darla crossed her arms. You lived here once. You know what this place meant, but if you try to steamroll us, you'll answer to me. A few chuckles broke the tension. Hayes smiled faintly. Fair enough. Sophia stepped forward. The proposal is simple. We work together. You oversee development, but the community has representation. Darla leads the transition. No one leaves until they have a safe place to go. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then he extended his hand toward Darla. Deal? She stared at his hand, then took it firmly. Deal. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Some residents cried. Others hugged. Keanu let out a long breath and looked over at Maya and Lily. Lily was beaming. Maya's eyes shimmered with relief. Judge Palmer gave Keanu a small nod, one of approval. Then she quietly left the room. An hour later, the room had mostly cleared out. Darla was huddled with community leaders, reviewing next steps. Sophia and Hayes were deep in discussion over construction timelines. Keanu sat on the front steps of Haven House, watching the night sky. Maya came out and sat beside him, Lily asleep in her lap. "You did it," she said quietly. Keanu shook his head. "We did it." Maya smiled. "Thank you." He looked down at Lily's peaceful face. "She's why." They sat in silence for a while. Finally, Keanu stood. "I should head out." Maya nodded. "See you tomorrow?" He smiled. "Wouldn't miss it." As he walked toward his motorcycle, Sophia caught up to him. "You sure you're ready for this?" she asked. Keanu chuckled softly. "I've been in worse fights." Sophia smirked. "Not like this." He glanced back at Haven House, lights glowing warmly in the windows. "No," he agreed. "Not like this." He slid his helmet on, started the engine, and rode into the night. But this time he wasn't riding away from something. He was riding toward something better. The following morning, the air around Haven House was electric with purpose. Construction crews arrived before dawn, unloading equipment and supplies. A large banner hung from the old brick building's second story. "Future home of the Haven House Medical Center, serving our community together." It was more than a construction project. It was a promise in action. Keanu stood beside Sophia Chen and Darla Washington as the first shovels hit the dirt on the adjacent lot. He wore his worn jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and a faded black ball cap pulled low over his eyes. No red carpet, no cameras, only a small group of residents watching in cautious hope. "This is the easy part," Sophia murmured to him. He nodded. "The hard part is getting people to believe it'll last." In the weeks that followed, Keanu divided his life between two very different worlds. By day, he was on set filming his latest project, often rushing from night shoots in Prague or Los Angeles back to the construction site at Haven House. His team was baffled at first. "You're flying back to work on a shelter?" one executive asked during a video call. "Yes," Keanu replied simply. No one questioned him after that. At Haven House, Keanu worked tirelessly. He met with architects, walked the site alongside engineers, and hammered nails himself when needed. He ate in the common room with the residents. He fixed squeaky doors and carried groceries into the kitchen. Slowly, people began to trust him. At first, there was skepticism. Some thought he was performing for the cameras, waiting for the right publicity moment. Others assumed he'd lose interest and disappear. But Keanu stayed. He swept the floors when no one was watching. He took out the trash at night without being asked. He sat quietly in community meetings, listening to complaints and suggestions without defense. And he kept showing up, day after day. One afternoon, Keanu found Maya sitting alone in the garden, her hands working a patch of stubborn soil, trying to plant new flowers around the perimeter. "Need a hand?" he asked, crouching down beside her. Maya looked at him for a long moment before nodding. "Sure." Together they worked in silence, patting down roots and clearing weeds. After a while, Maya said quietly, "Lily's surgery is scheduled for next month." Keanu looked up, careful to keep his expression calm. "That's good." "She's scared," Maya admitted. "And I'm terrified. But I know it's the right thing." Keanu nodded. "And after the surgery?" Maya sighed. "She'll need recovery time, consistent checkups, medication." She gave a wry smile. "And a mother who can hold it together." "You're already doing that," Keanu said. Maya looked at him again, studying his face as if searching for something. Then she exhaled. "You meant it, didn't you? When you said you'd help?" "I did." She hesitated, then finally said, "Then I'll accept it, for Lily's sake." Keanu's relief was quiet but profound. He nodded once. "I'll take care of it." The next morning, Keanu made the arrangements himself. He reached out to top pediatric cardiac surgeons, flew them in for consultations, and ensured Lily was scheduled at the best children's hospital in the region. He handled everything discreetly, working with Sophia to protect Maya and Lily's privacy. Maya was overwhelmed at first, but Keanu's respect for their dignity never wavered. "This isn't charity," he told her. "It's what neighbors do." Meanwhile, Richard Hayes was also changing in ways few expected. Inspired by Keanu's relentless work ethic and Sophia's community-first approach, Hayes announced a $10 million donation to create the Mary Ann Hayes Foundation, named for his late mother. The foundation's mission was simple: to fund mental health services, housing initiatives, and job training for vulnerable families across the city. Hayes held a press conference to make the announcement. He didn't read from a script. His voice cracked when he mentioned his mother, but he didn't shy away from the truth of his story. "She was failed by the system," Hayes said. "I'm committed to making sure fewer families face what we did." For the first time in years, his voice sounded less like a corporate strategist and more like a man who understood loss and hope. A week later, Judge Loretta Palmer visited Haven House unannounced. She walked the perimeter of the newly framed medical center, nodding at the progress. Inside the old building, she greeted Darla warmly and spoke quietly with residents. In the common room, she found Keanu sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by children. Lily was teaching him how to braid lanyards, her frail fingers deftly weaving plastic strands. "Mr. Reeves," Judge Palmer said. Keanu looked up, smiling. "Your Honor?" She glanced around the room, her eyes taking in the scene, the laughter, the quiet work, the faint smell of fresh paint from the ongoing renovations. Then she turned back to Keanu. "When I sentenced you to community service, I hoped you'd learn something," she said. "I didn't expect all this." Keanu chuckled softly. "Neither did I." Palmer nodded approvingly. "You're not just doing time, Mr. Reeves. You're building something lasting." He shook his head modestly. "We are, all of us." Judge Palmer regarded him a moment longer, then smiled faintly. "Good." As the medical center took shape, the atmosphere around Haven House transformed. Families who had been packing their things in fear now unpacked boxes and painted walls. Children who had once whispered about where they might have to sleep next month now ran in the yard, confident they wouldn't have to leave. Maya helped organize job training programs with Sophia, using her own experience to guide other single parents through applications and interviews. Mr. Alvarez taught young men how to fix cars in the makeshift garage behind the building. Lily's drawings of her perfect shelter hung proudly on the new community bulletin board. And every evening, Keanu quietly walked the perimeter, checking on progress, talking to residents, making sure no one felt forgotten. Late one night, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Keanu sat on the steps of the nearly finished medical center. The windows gleamed with fresh glass. The framework stood solid and sure. Maya joined him, carrying 2 cups of tea. "Almost there," she said, handing him one. He nodded. "Almost." She took a sip, then smiled faintly. "You're different than I thought you'd be." Keanu glanced at her, eyebrows raised. "How so?" Maya shrugged. "I figured you'd fix what was broken and move on. I didn't expect you to stay." He smiled softly. "I didn't expect to stay either." They sat in silence for a while, watching as the lights in Haven House flickered on, one by one, across the windows. Inside, Lily was drawing plans for her next invention. Mr. Alvarez was closing up the tool shed, and Sophia and Hayes were reviewing documents for the next phase of construction. Haven House wasn't just surviving anymore. It was thriving. And Keanu knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning. 6 months later, the headlines told a story no one had expected. Keanu Reeves transforms Haven House into a national model for dignity and housing. Hollywood's humble hero inspires a new era of ethical redevelopment. From homeless shelter to hopeful future, how a community changed the rules. What started as a single building on the east side of Los Angeles became the blueprint for something much bigger, a movement. At the heart of it all was a quiet man who never wanted the attention. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for Haven House's newly expanded medical wing drew an unusual crowd. City officials, housing advocates, journalists from around the country, even celebrities who had worked with Keanu Reeves on set stood quietly in the back, unsure what to expect. Keanu, as always, kept his speech short. "This isn't about me," he said plainly, standing in front of the gleaming glass doors. "It's about what happens when people care for one another. It's about giving everyone a chance to build a life with dignity. That's it." The crowd applauded. Cameras clicked, but Keanu's eyes sought out only two people in the sea of faces: Maya and Lily. Lily, no longer frail and pale but glowing with health, stood proudly beside her mother, holding a pair of scissors almost as big as her smile. They cut the ribbon together. After the ceremony, Sophia Chen approached Keanu as he lingered on the edge of the crowd, watching residents explore the new space. He was dressed simply, as always, his hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. "You know this is only the beginning, right?" she said, her sharp gaze softened by respect. Keanu smiled faintly. "I was afraid you'd say that." Sophia chuckled. "You've done more than anyone expected." Keanu turned to her, serious now. "Not enough. Not yet." She nodded. "Then let's keep going." Within 3 months, Keanu and Sophia officially launched the Horizon Reeves Initiative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to reimagining housing solutions with a focus on dignity, community, and sustainability. Their first project, Haven House 2, was already under construction in Oakland. Unlike traditional shelters, Haven House 2 included co-op housing units, on-site daycare, career training spaces, and even a rooftop garden managed by the residents themselves. "We don't just build structures," Sophia explained in an interview. "We build communities where people help each other thrive." Keanu said little during interviews, but his presence alone was enough. When he did speak, it was always about the people. "The people at Haven House taught me more about resilience than I ever learned on a film set," he told one reporter. "They deserve a place that honors their courage." Lily's health continued to improve after her surgery. Doctors marveled at her recovery, and soon she was attending school regularly again. But it was her after-school activities that made her happiest. Every afternoon she ran a tiny workshop in the new Haven House Community Center, teaching other kids about basic robotics. With Keanu's help, and Sophia's tech grants, she built simple circuits and remote-controlled devices that could help with daily chores. One day she presented her latest invention to Keanu and Maya, a medication reminder robot shaped like a small owl. Its big blinking eyes and cheerful beeps delighted both of them. "I call it HopeBot," Lily explained proudly, "because it helps people remember they're not alone." Keanu's eyes glistened as he knelt to examine it. "I think the world needs a lot more of these." Maya ruffled her daughter's hair, smiling. "She has a lot of ideas." "She gets that from you," Keanu replied, and Maya blushed softly. Later that week, Keanu offered Maya a permanent position at Haven House. "You're already doing the work," he told her, "but we want you to lead." At first, Maya hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm qualified." "Who better to run this place?" Darla Washington said, stepping forward, "than someone who's lived it." Darla was preparing to retire after 25 years, ready to hand over the reins. Maya agreed to shadow her for 3 months before stepping into the role of assistant director officially. When she did, no one doubted she was the right person for the job. Richard Hayes was another story. At first, many doubted his intentions. Even after his mother's name appeared on the new community clinic and his foundation funded mental health services across 3 states, some believed it was just PR. But Hayes kept showing up. He spoke at forums about ethical redevelopment, calling on his fellow developers to focus less on profits and more on partnerships. He testified before Congress, advocating for stricter protections against displacement in federally funded housing projects. At a high-preferable conference in New York, Hayes took the stage and admitted something few had expected. "For a long time, I thought I could erase my past by replacing it," he said, standing in front of a packed auditorium. "I believed building something new was better than fixing what was broken. But I was wrong. What I learned from Haven House, from Sophia Chen, from Keanu Reeves, and from the people I once tried to displace is simple. The future can't be built if we forget the people who need it most." When he finished speaking, the applause was genuine. Even his fiercest critics acknowledged the sincerity behind his efforts. The media loved the story. Articles appeared in Time, Forbes, The Atlantic, praising the Haven House model as revolutionary. "This isn't just philanthropy," one journalist wrote. "It's a blueprint for balancing innovation with compassion." Cities across the country reached out to the Horizon Reeves initiative. Boston, Detroit, and New Orleans signed on to pilot similar projects. Developers, once wary of dignity-based housing, began adopting the phased construction strategies that Sophia and Keanu had pioneered. But Keanu avoided the spotlight as much as possible. When reporters asked for comment, he declined. When camera crews showed up at Haven House, he waved them off, gently. "I'm not the story," he said simply. Instead, he returned to work, quietly, patiently, humbly. On a cool autumn evening, months after the grand opening of Haven House's medical center, Keanu rode his motorcycle up to the old brick building. The familiar rumble of the engine brought a few curious glances, but no fanfare greeted him. That was how he liked it. Inside, the community center was bustling with activity. Children played in the reading corner while teens worked on computers, supervised by volunteers. Maya was in her office, reviewing files. Lily was at the front desk, signing in visitors. When she saw Keanu, her face lit up. "Spaceman," she called, using the nickname she had affectionately given him. He chuckled softly. "How's Hopebot doing?" "It's working," she said proudly. "We're testing it at the clinic next week." "That's great," he said, giving her a gentle high five. Maya emerged from her office, a folder in hand. "Didn't expect to see you today." Keanu shrugged, just checking in. She smiled. "You're always welcome here." He walked with them through the hallways, taking in the sight of new murals painted by local artists, the fresh coats of paint, the gleaming windows. The place had changed, but the heart of it was the same. As they stood in the garden, Maya pointed to the flowers she and Keanu had planted months earlier. They had bloomed in vibrant colors, thriving in the sunlight. "You did this," Maya said softly. Keanu shook his head. "We did." She watched him quietly. "You could have left after your service hours were done." "I was supposed to," he admitted. "But something about this place, I couldn't walk away." "You didn't just rebuild a shelter," Maya said, her voice full of gratitude. "You rebuilt a community." Keanu looked out across the garden, where children played and laughter echoed. "No," he said softly. "They rebuilt me." Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Keanu climbed back onto his motorcycle. He looked back once at the building bathed in golden light. And then he rode off, as he always did, leaving behind something more lasting than any role he'd ever played on screen. A legacy of quiet strength, of dignity, of hope. 1 year later, Haven House didn't just look different, it felt different. What was once an aging brick shelter on the edge of collapse had transformed into a vibrant community hub. The windows gleamed, the gardens bloomed, and laughter echoed through the courtyard where children played. The new medical center stood proudly beside the original building, its glass doors always open. Even the walls inside the old house were brighter, covered with colorful murals painted by the residents themselves. The change wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, something alive. And yet, for all the attention it had received over the last year, today was quiet. An open house had brought families, volunteers, and donors together to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of Haven House's rebirth. There were no news cameras, no reporters, no grand speeches. Keanu preferred it that way. He stood near the entrance, blending in with the crowd as much as a world-famous actor could. His motorcycle helmet was tucked under his arm, and his worn boots scuffed the freshly swept sidewalk. He watched as people mingled. Kids ran around with homemade paper kites, and a band of young musicians performed on a makeshift stage. He wasn't here for praise, he never was. He was here because he needed to see it for himself. Hope, alive, breathing. "Spaceman." The small voice rang out above the music and chatter, and Keanu turned just in time to see Lily sprint toward him, her sneakers pounding against the concrete path. She crashed into him with a hug, nearly knocking his helmet out of his hands. Keanu laughed, a quiet, genuine sound, and hugged her back carefully. Lily had grown taller. Her cheeks were round with health now, her dark eyes bright with curiosity. There was a lightness to her that hadn't been there a year ago. "Hey, Lil," Keanu said softly, "you look good." "I feel good," she grinned. "Mom says I'm a superhero now, titanium valve in my heart and everything." Keanu smiled, pride swelling in his chest. He remembered sitting with Maya in that cold waiting room, waiting for news about Lily's surgery. He remembered the relief that flooded him when the doctor finally came out, smiling, and said, "She's going to be okay." "She's right, you know," Keanu said. "You are a superhero." Lily's grin widened. "Come on, I want to show you something." She grabbed his hand and tugged him toward the community center. Inside, the space buzzed with life. Maya stood at a reception desk, talking with a young couple holding hands. Keanu gave her a nod, and she returned it with a warm, knowing smile. "Down here," Lily said, leading him into one of the small tech rooms. The walls were covered with shelves of books, toolkits, and bins of donated electronics. A whiteboard bore sketches of circuits and schematics in bright marker. On a table in the middle of the room sat her latest project. "It's finished," Lily said proudly. "HopeBot." Keanu bent down to examine it. The little robot was about the size of a toaster, painted sky blue with large, blinking eyes. Its tiny wheels allowed it to move smoothly across the table. A small digital clock on its belly displayed the time. "What does it do?" Keanu asked, though he had a pretty good idea. "It reminds people to take their medicine," Lily said. "It keeps track of the time and makes a noise when it's time to take a pill, see?" She pressed a button and the robot beeped softly before speaking in a cheerful voice. "It's time for your medication." "You're doing great." Keanu chuckled, genuinely impressed. "That's amazing." "It's for Miss Carmen," Lily said, pointing to an older woman sitting nearby, crocheting. "She kept forgetting to take her heart medicine, so now HopeBot reminds her." He looked over at Carmen, who gave him a wave and a smile. "It works," she called. "Haven't missed a dose since this little guy came along." Keanu stood up, his throat tightening. He rested a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "You built this?" She nodded. "With Maya's help on the instructions, and Mr. Rivera helped with the programming, but I did the soldering myself." Keanu smiled, his eyes soft. "You did good, Lily." "Spaceman," she said, more quietly now. "Do you think HopeBot could help other people too? Not just Miss Carmen?" "I think it could help a lot of people," Keanu replied. "And I think you're just getting started." Lily's smile was smaller this time, more thoughtful. "I want to help," she said. "Like you did." He chuckled. "I didn't really know what I was doing." "You showed up," she said. "That's what Mom says. Showing up counts." Later, Keanu wandered the halls of Haven House one last time. He passed the kitchen, where volunteers served dinner to families seated at communal tables. He passed the small library, where kids curled up in beanbag chairs with books on their laps. He passed a classroom, where adults studied job applications and resumes under Maya's guidance. In the garden out back, Darla Washington sat on a bench, watching two toddlers chase a butterfly. She was retired now, but she came back sometimes to visit. She caught Keanu's eye and gave him a simple nod. He returned it, understanding passing silently between them. "You did good," her eyes seemed to say. So did they all. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Keanu made his way back to the front of the building. The open house was winding down, the music softer, the laughter quieter. Maya approached him as he reached for his helmet. "Leaving?" she asked. Keanu nodded. "It's time." Maya studied him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "You don't stay long anywhere, do you?" He shrugged lightly. "Not really my style." Maya reached out, her hand resting on his arm. "Thank you, Keanu, for everything." He shook his head. "Thank them. They did the real work." She squeezed his arm, then let go. "Still, thank you." Keanu swung a leg over his motorcycle and settled into the seat. He adjusted his gloves, his movements slow and deliberate. He glanced back once at Haven House, the place that had changed him more than he could ever say. The place where he had found something he hadn't known he was searching for. A reminder that home isn't a place, it's people. And dignity isn't something you give, it's something you honor. With a low rumble, the motorcycle came to life. He pulled down his visor, gave Maya and Lily a final nod, and rode off down the quiet street. No cameras followed, no reporters called after him. Just a man on a motorcycle, disappearing into the city. Keanu Reeves didn't just build homes. He rebuilt lives. And somewhere along the way, he rebuilt his own. Sometimes, the most powerful leaders are the ones who say the least. Keanu Reeves didn't give a grand speech the day he rode away from Haven House. He didn't post on social media or call a press conference. There was no need. His actions had already spoken louder than words ever could. And yet, his journey left behind a legacy that reshaped not just a single shelter, but an entire movement. What began as a punishment, 1,000 hours of mandatory service, became something much more profound. It was never about repaying a debt. It was about reconnecting with something simple. Human dignity, respect, quiet courage. For all his fame, for all his wealth, Keanu realized that real change doesn't happen from a distance. It happens when you show up, not with money, not with status, but with your hands, your time, and your heart. In the quiet halls of Haven House, among families who once felt invisible, Keanu became more than an actor or a name on a movie poster. He became a neighbor, a teammate, a friend. And that's what made the difference. He worked alongside people who had every reason to give up hope, but didn't. He watched a young girl with a fragile heart dream up machines to make the world a little safer. He listened to a mother who refused to let her pride be diminished by circumstance. He learned from Darla Washington, who spent a lifetime building bridges where society had put up walls. Keanu didn't come in with solutions. He didn't have all the answers, but he listened. He learned. And when it was time to act, he acted with quiet strength. That's what real leadership looks like. It's not standing above others, it's standing with them. And the most remarkable thing, you don't have to be Keanu Reeves to make that kind of difference. You just have to show up. You just have to care. In the year that followed the transformation of Haven House, the ripples spread farther than anyone could have predicted. City planners toured the facility, calling it a model for inclusive redevelopment. Developers who once ignored low-income housing came to learn about the phased construction model that kept families together. Other shelters adopted Sophia Chen's Dignity First tech programs, and more importantly, communities stopped seeing homelessness as a problem to be managed and started seeing it as a human crisis that could be solved. And yet, through all the headlines, Keanu stayed in the background. He wasn't interested in becoming the face of a movement. He was interested in ensuring the movement lasted long after he left. Maya, who had once looked at him with suspicion, now ran Haven House as its assistant director. Her calm authority and fierce compassion made her a leader families trusted. Lily, bright, curious Lily, became the youngest recipient of a City Innovation Award for her HopeBot project, which was already being adapted in clinics around the region. And Richard Hayes, the man who once vowed to bulldoze the place, he became one of its most vocal advocates, pledging his company's resources to ethical redevelopment, insisting on community input at every level. The lesson they all learned was simple but profound. True leadership doesn't demand attention, it invites participation. It doesn't issue commands, it offers respect. And it doesn't divide people by wealth, status, or appearance, it lifts them up equally. As Judge Loretta Palmer said when asked about her unusual sentencing, justice isn't just about punishment, it's about rehabilitation, and sometimes it's about redemption. Keanu's story wasn't one of redemption because he was a bad man. Far from it. It was a story of a good man rediscovering what mattered most. And if someone as humble and compassionate as Keanu Reeves can still find room to grow, maybe we all can. Because in a world that often rewards noise, it's the quiet strength that endures. We all have moments when we can choose to look away or step forward. When we can choose judgment or understanding. When we can choose indifference or compassion. Real change doesn't require celebrity status or a bank account full of zeros. It requires presence, listening, willingness to lift others, quietly and consistently. You don't need a movie camera to make a difference. You just need to show up. If Keanu's incredible story moved you, do one simple thing right now. Like this video, share it with someone who believes in second chances. And don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming tales that restore your faith in humanity. Your support helps us tell more stories like this, stories that matter. Stories that remind us that dignity is worth more than status. And before you go, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed someone being judged unfairly? What did you do? What would you do? Share your story in the comments below. Let's inspire each other to be the quiet strength this world needs. Keanu Reeves didn't just rebuild a shelter, he rebuilt lives. And along the way, he reminded us that leadership isn't about power. It's about presence. It's about lifting someone up when they need it most. Sometimes, the quietest voices echo the loudest.